Hey, I just wanted to take some time today and talk about why I did this whole rewiring the stress response thing. Um, I just want to be real transparent with my motives and, let people know what brought me here and why I do this. So, 10 years ago, I got these crazy panic symptoms, didn't know why. Over the course of 10 years, I saw three different doctors. We ran hundreds of tests. We never figured that anything was wrong. They kept telling me that nothing was. All the tests were coming back good. I didn't find out until almost 10 years later that I had actually been fighting an infection. Um, the point of all that is I was having all these mystery symptoms. And because I wasn't getting any help from the doctors, I was forced in a position that I was trying to deal with that myself. And I had symptoms like heart palpitations and tremors and sweats. I couldn't sleep. I had, times I'd have trouble eating. And, as I was forced to do the research and I began to get into the background of all this, I went through like I had no clue what was going on. So I was addressing each of these symptoms, and trying to knock them out one by one. And I went to a bunch of specialists, and I did healing, cleansing protocols and diets and fasting and all those, in an effort to heal my body because I was feeling all these symptoms, in my body. And when I really got down to the bottom of things, I really began to just say, hey, look, I've got to figure this out. When I started getting to the bottom of each one of these symptoms, I started to notice a pattern. And a pattern was all of these symptoms were rooted in what I call the stress response for conversational English. The truth is, it's the sympathetic response happening within the autonomic nervous system. And when I started to learn about that, man, all of a sudden everything started coming together and making sense. It's called the autonomic nervous system because the processes that it controls are automatic. Things like eye movement, pupil dilation, breathing rate, heart rate, um, your heat, regulation, flushing, sweating, perspiration, sleep patterns, arousal, sexual arousal, and even anger arousal. All those things are controlled automatically within the autonomic nervous system. In other words, when a thought or pattern in your brain is triggered, in the case of something like what I'm talking about, a lot of people may call it the fight or flight response. Some people call it vagal tone, but there's a stimulus, and that stimulus is external. Something happened on to you, right? That stimulates a response in the brain. And if the brain senses that as traumatic or stressful in the amygdala, then it automatically, or right, autonomously, the autonomic nervous system triggers this biological response. And of course, I was excited because I'm like, wow, I'm finally feel like I'm getting to the bottom of where all these symptoms are coming from because they were all random symptoms for me in the beginning. But now all of a sudden, they're all related. They're all coming from the same place. They're all triggered by the same things. And I'm like, okay, so we're getting somewhere. I read an awesome book on neuroplasticity by Dr. Caroline Leaf, and then I was really excited. So, neuroplasticity is simply the idea that the brain is constantly changing, constantly developing, constantly organizing, and constantly trying to run as efficiently as it can. But what that let me know was regardless of what your symptoms are today, regardless of the patterns that you're feeling today, or the physical symptoms that are being triggered by your thoughts, neuroplasticity meant that it absolutely could be changed. And that's exciting for everybody. So fast forward into this whole brain training thing, right? I was able to get rid of nearly all my symptoms by shutting down the what we call the sympathetic response, by activating, more importantly, the parasympathetic response, increasing vagal tone, by getting my brain not to recognize something as traumatic or stressful, so that that whole stress response, sympathetic response, wasn't triggered in the first place. See, when I first got into this, all the approaches that I was looking at, every place I was trying to go for help, and none of them were wrong. And and I did get a little bit of help here and there. But in every case, at least in all the treatments or programs that I saw, it was always about managing the symptoms, right? So like if you're whatever stressful feelings you're feeling, like that if you're agitated, or you're breathing a little faster, right, because you're angry, or you're having trouble falling asleep, in any of those cases, the programs or treatments that I was seeing would be something to manage the effects of the stress you were feeling. Like there was meditation exercises, or there was breathing exercises, right? Or yoga, or even heart coherence, heart rate variability, right? To improve that. The common denominator I noticed with all these was that they were all treating the symptoms of stress once that biological stress response was triggered. But what I found with brain training is it precedes all that biological stress response. In other words, like when I would come home from work and I'd be excited to get home to see my kids, but then when I would get home, if they were running around, making a lot of noise and just being kids, then I would be irritated. And to me, that was like pushing my buttons. Well, what I found was when I did the brain training and actually rewired that stress response, the biological response, the stimulus, and what it triggers in my brain, when I reset that, and instead of people or situations pushing my buttons, there is no button. There's no symptom to manage, right? I'm like a 12-year-old walking into a room of kids that are yelling and chasing the dog. It just seems like fun rather than triggering an irritation response. So that's the foundation of how all this came together. And the reason I do this is because for probably 3 years, things were really hard. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I knew something was wrong. And, doctors were telling me that there wasn't. And I'll be honest with you, I was really, really sick for a while. Of course, I know now that I had an actual pathological infection, but I didn't know it back then. Remember, I just was dealing with these stress symptoms, one by one. And I remember laying in bed at night, just crying out to God for an answer. I'm like, this isn't me. This isn't my life. I need help. And that's why I do this, because I remember that. And I know that there are other people who are going through similar things. And I also know that our medical system, there's a gap in the way they address issues like this, because it's not completely mental, which, psychology, psychiatry address, and it's not completely medical, because, that's what medical doctors address, or stuff within the body. It's not completely the body. It's the central nervous system. So it's absolutely the brain, but it's absolutely the body. And, these symptoms that we're feeling, the stress response, are somewhere in between those things. And I think a lot of doctors, whether they went to the mental health route or they went the physical health route, these symptoms that we're experiencing are falling in the gap somewhere in between. And I think a lot of people just aren't getting the help that they need. Or a lot of people are like me, they don't want to be on drugs. And truthfully, the drugs really just address the symptoms anyway. They're not really getting to the root of the problem. And the root of the entire autonomic nervous system response, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, is the brain. If we go to the brain, then we circumvent the response before it even happens. There is no button to push, right? So that's why I do this. I do this because I know there are other people in the same situation that I was in. I know that they're asking for help. I know they're crying out for help. And this stuff works, man. It's amazing. Brain training, neurofeedback, neuroplasticity training, cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, these things go right to the root of where all the symptoms that you feel come from. And not feeling the symptoms in the first place is way better than trying to manage the symptoms after you're already feeling them. And I hope this is encouraging to you guys. I just want to share a little bit about my background, how I got here, and a little bit of my heart and why I do this. I hope this is encouraging. I got lots of stuff that I'm going to continue to share with you guys. By the way, if you're interested, if you want to know more, if you want to work with me, then just reach out. Shoot me a message. I'll be happy to set up a time. I'll look at, I'm going to publish my schedule. We'll set up a time. I'll take a call with you, and we'll talk about where you're at and where you want to be, and how to get there. And regardless of where you're coming from or what your questions are, I just want to give you my word. I want you to see my heart. If we have a conversation like that, no matter what comes out of it, I give you my word, I promise you, that you're going to get value out of it. You're going to be better for it, because that's my heart. I'm going to give you something. Have a great day. I look forward to talking with you soon.